Hi, Tamara. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yes, not doing very well. So it's amazing to have you today. And I know you told me you have been interviewing quite
Yeah.
many fascinating people.
Yeah, I was saying before that it's kind of nice to be on the opposite side for a change because the last 2 weeks I've been doing a lot of interviews for my own podcast. So it's nice to be on the flip side. Really excited.
Yeah, good. So, so this is controversial conversation, or
Yeah.
rather discussing the paradox or controversy, or another way of putting it, counterintuitive truth that
Mm.
you might be living in your life right now, or
Yeah.
something that might come to your mind right now.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, like I said, when we got on the call, I was kind of struggling with what topic to kind of bring to the table. And literally, probably about a minute before, like 30 seconds before I hit join for the call, the thing that came to me was around empathy. And it's been, with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, it's been a big topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And it's something I've been good at and bad at in the past. And I think the topic that was coming to mind was around, like, I guess the controversial part is the realization that if you aren't expressing empathy in the interaction, anything negative that happens is your fault.
Hmm, interesting. So if you are not expressing empathy, everything what happens is your fault.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know if fault is the right word, but it's kind of links to that, like our perception of what goes wrong or what's negative in any kind of interaction or situation. How can we twist that to be positive through empathy and connection?
Yeah, twisting perception for empathy and connection. How do you manage to do that?
I think, and it's something that I've consciously been more aware of and tried to do more actively in the past couple of years. But whenever I come to a situation, if I feel that immediate reaction in like an interaction or something where I'm like, oh, that person is wrong. What are they thinking? What are they doing? I'll catch myself. And again, it's something you have to be consciously aware of. It's not easy, but I'll catch myself. And instead I'll ask myself the question, how are me and this person similar? And then using that tiny thread of connection, I'll then try to go deeper with that of, okay, how can I try to understand this person's point of view? And
Mm.
it kind of comes from a conversation I had earlier today. And in that, I kind of talked about one comment or one quote that's kind of always stood out to me. And it was a quote by an ex-CIA executive. And she was asked what was the number one lesson she learned from working for the CIA. And the quote that she gave was, everyone believes they are the good guy. Meaning that for the person standing in front of you, your perception may be that they're completely wrong, they're completely like out of line, everything they say, there's no way to understand what they're saying or thinking or doing. But somewhere in their life, their experiences, their thoughts, their knowledge of the world, for them, it's the right thing.
Mm.
So how can we use that empathy and that connection to try and get to what that thing is, to understand it better? Not necessarily agree, but to understand it.
Yes, yes. I really like that, Tamara. That's a very good quote that everyone thinks he or she is a good guy. And
Yeah.
actually, what comes to me is that the sentence that we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge
Yeah.
others by their behavior.
Yeah.
And so intentions is basically the thoughts that we're telling ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's our own justifications. Like, why are we doing what we're doing or saying what we're doing? What,
Yeah.
yeah, and we forget that the people in front of us, they have their own intentions that come from their own experiences. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's beautiful to be able to see the positive and the negative, and
Yeah.
the negative and the positive, and that's what kind of creates the wealth of the experience. So, and it's all nice and good
Mm.
when it's in a spirit of debate.
Yeah.
What I personally find very difficult is when I'm properly triggered.
Yeah.
So do you know when the lizard brain switches on? So what if somebody expresses really extremist point of view?
Yeah.
How we are open-minded. We speak to people from different backgrounds, different skin colors, different accents. What if someone so stuck in their bias and they actually quite extreme in their expressions? How that I find it quite challenging in that moment.
Yeah.
How would
Yeah.
you approach that?
Yeah. And I think that there's the thought that came to my mind when you were talking about that is, for me in that moment, and again, like the initial reaction is, I probably want to punch this person if it's that kind of triggering. But I guess the challenge is to ask questions and try to understand their point of view, not to change their point of view. If they're that stuck in it, then maybe it's not our job to change it. But maybe there's a lesson in there that we can learn for ourselves that we can take into our own journey and either share with others or improve our own journey in some way.
Yes, that's true, and there is normally a lesson in everything.
Or if it's that triggering, walk the hell away. Like, I've done that as well. Yeah.
Do you know what I find the most fascinating on the subject of empathy? And I know there are some such type of people who are able to do that. Is when a child is hurt, like one child, and then there are some people who, through inner work and really mastering the empathy, can eventually forgive. Or you read the stories, and that's what it blows my mind. What type of work did this parent potentially have done to get to that stage? This is what I'm like, because for me, the children are the triggers at the deepest level.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's that protective element too. Like we want to protect those that can't protect themselves. And children are definitely in that category. I just want to clarify something around the point that you made. When you talk about the parent, do you mean the parent doing the harm or the parent?
No, it's just because I totally agree with your point of view on empathy and how important it is to understand another person's point of view. So I'm just trying to bring the side of like the parent whose child is hurt, and actually, because it's so close to my heart and it's interesting, it's almost painful for me to even express it. Like say, when the child is murdered, God forbid, or what, like the moms of those black boys. My gosh, this is awful, right? Or girls as well, So how, how is it possible to have empathy as a parent for the abuser, right?
Yeah.
And some
Yeah.
of them do manage to have it, and that's kind of.
Yeah. I think for me, like one quote that I always go to when I hear of things like this is that forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you. And sometimes it's better, and maybe for those parents, it's better for them to release that negativity and to forgive and move on, not forget, but to forgive and move on, than it is to hold on with that pain and that anger every single day.
Yes, yes. It's kind of what Dostoevsky was writing all
Yeah.
those years back, right? In Crime and Punishment, that basically happens in our, forgiveness and empathy happens in our own head for us.
Yeah. And it's not easy. Like there's someone who recently hurt me quite badly, and I'm still struggling with trying to forgive them. I still feel a lot of anger towards them, and a little bit of anger for myself as well, for allowing them to hurt me, if that makes sense as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a physical way, it was emotionally, but
Yes.
but yeah, like it's not easy to do that, and sometimes it does take time. And sometimes you're not going to be able to have the conversations that you feel you need to have to get that empathy, or to get that closure and that forgiveness. But yeah.
Yes, you're so right, Tamara. And and I have to share it with you as well. So for me, I did have, obviously we all have those type of experiences. And you're so right. So until we forgive ourselves in our head, it's difficult to move on, because the thought will be returning to that situation. And as you say, it's like not always possible to have that conversation, but actually sometimes it's actually not even necessary to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been even thinking about this Hawaiian prayer, because I had like similar experience of being hurt by someone over whatever. Actually, it was almost like 2.5 years ago, but my thoughts kept returning to that person. And then I thought, Tatiana, just practice what you preach, and try this Hawaiian prayers while I was on the run, but properly feeling it through. Do you know that's the ones? Do you know the one which I mean? Or?
No.
So it's when basically when we say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me. Thank you. I love you."
I have actually heard that one now. Yeah. Now that you say what it is, I have heard it. Yeah. And I can feel how that affects you too.
If we say it in our own kind of, but truly, because and that's exactly what you said, that there is always negative and a positive, because even having gone through that experience of emotional hurt that you just said you experienced recently, there is something which you learned from that for you, right?
Yeah, I love that you've reminded me of that poem, because as we sit here and have this interview, I'm looking out my window and I'm watching the full moon come up above the buildings, and it's got this like red tinge and like a bit of a cloud across it at the moment. So I feel like as soon as we finish this interview, I'm going to sit there under the full moon and do exactly that. New beginnings, letting go.
Wow. Let me know how it goes.
I will. Perfect timing for that reminder.
So what? So when did you feel you truly were able to leave your definition of empathy?
It's really probably only been maybe the last couple of years that I've actively been thinking about it. And even still now, I still catch myself in moments where I'm like, okay, you weren't empathetic then. You just made a comment that had zero empathy and zero thought for empathy in that. So it's like nobody's perfect. It's not something I think anyone's ever going to get to that 100% Buddha Zen where we're going to be empathetic 100% of the time. But it is, I personally believe that if I actively practice it more and more, as much as I can, that it will become more and more natural. And those instances where I'm not being empathetic will be less.
Mm. Yes, it's like a muscle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I have noticed the change. I have noticed be less over the last couple of years.
So what I'm wondering is, what about self-empathy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that, because as we were talking about this, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, what is self-empathy? And like, is it the same as self-love? Or is it the same as like self-awareness? Like, I don't know if I have an answer for that yet, because like it's just a thought that's kind of come up. But like, I guess for me, like I do practice self-love things. Like I buy myself roses and put them beside my bed, or like I purposely, stretched my budget to get a beautiful apartment that, it's kind of pushing it a little bit, but it's a place where I feel like me, like the powerful businesswoman who helps people, who loves people. Like, I'm me in this apartment. And like, I'll spoil myself with a glass of champagne if I'm feeling crap. Like, so I think having those practices are really important to constantly be in touch with your own inner work, and remembering that you should be offering the best to yourself before you offer it to others.
Yeah.
Which is hard. It's hard because like we are taught that that's a selfish thing.
Yes.
So.
It's so true, because there is no space to offer proper love to others if we don't love ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There is a whole paradox of selfishness, which actually is another one. Is fascinating. Do you know? I just was thinking when you said what is self-empathy and how is it different from self-love? Because I love what you're doing with treating yourself, how in a way how you would like others to treat you and how you would like to treat others as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I love to entertain. Like I bought gold-plated cutlery and beautiful plates and glasses so that when this coronavirus thing is done, I can have amazing dinner parties and bring people into that like beautiful world I've created here. So
that's so basically you're sharing the self-love because you were able to do it for yourself with others, and that comes very genuinely.
Yeah.
So about self-empathy, I'm still quite fascinated.
I know. Because for me, empathy is love and connection. So I guess it's taking those moments to love and connect with yourself.
Yeah.
With all of yourself. Like one of the things I did about a year ago, which is a huge turning point for me, was finally getting really in touch with and accepting what I used to call my dark side. So like the side of me that, like, I've always been someone who's been quite intuitive about people and being able to build relationships easily. And one of the reasons I got into coaching is because I can easily see the light in people and how to bring that out. And the dark side of that is that I can also use that same skill to see every little fear they have, every anxiety, and push those buttons as well and destroy. And for a long time, I was afraid of that ability. And it took a lot of going deep within myself to realize that at the core of who I am, I care so deeply about people in general that it would take it would take life or death threatening myself or someone I love for me to ever actually do that to someone at like full blast.
Mm-hmm.
And once I realized that about myself and connected with that part of myself, I realized I could trust that part of myself.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It is amazing how within us there are, the gifts that we have, there is always a dark
Yeah.
side. And
Yeah.
you said that your realization of who you truly are versus how you can, versus sometimes when one is triggered, how this dark sides of the gifts shows up. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
and actually then, whom is it going to hurt the most?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I was afraid of it, because I knew if I ever accidentally destroyed someone, I would be absolutely devastated to do that to another human being, intentionally or unintentionally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's right. So, and it's basically, I guess, empathy, self-empathy is accepting those sides, those different sides of ourselves. And also,
Yeah.
if sometimes you say, you said before, or sometimes I say something and I think, oh, that wasn't a very empathetic comment.
Yeah.
But actually, empathy to self is to also say, well, yes, so that's basically, kind of the
Yeah,
opposite,
to acknowledge it. Yeah.
to acknowledge that. And it's not like, and it's not like not meaning that, well, now I can do it all the time.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that it's part of the journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was also like realizing the strengths of that side of myself, like the side of myself that is fearless and can stand up to anything, and realizing that even though that side of myself has that ability to destroy, it's also going to be it's also the side that gets me through all the really horrible things that you have to deal with, like any put downs or any challenges that you come up against or blockages, anything that you're struggling with. It's that side of you that's going to get you through it, the survivor side.
Yes, yes. And it's basically, I like the concept of there are different versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
And actually, I think fundamentally that's what also will leads to empathy for others or compassion for others. Because, when we know, like, say the version which is sitting here of me is very different, would be very different of the version if somebody's trying to hurt my children, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And basically realizing that some people were actually raised in the environment that they had to permanently were in a stage of this triggers, of
Yeah.
those triggers. And basically that's why their other versions were always coming out.
Yeah, I love that, because I'd never really considered it from that standpoint, that because they were raised in that environment that required that version of themselves, that's all they've learned how to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Or might have been, whichever circumstances,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think is dark side of empathy?
So it was interesting because I wrote an article on this recently with the George Floyd incident and everything that's going on in the States. And for me, not just that issue, but many of the other similar issues happening around the world, it comes down to that classic love versus hate thing. And as I said before, for me, love is empathy. And I actually I had to Google what the opposite of empathy was, and it was distance, which I found so powerful, because like it's true that if we do distance ourselves from something, or someone, they become this other. And whatever happens to them, however they're treated, becomes completely disconnected from us. And so, yeah, maybe that's what the dark side of empathy is. It's that acting in a way that is unrelated to you at all, disconnected from you. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. So basically what you're saying is that when we become too empathetic with someone, we disconnect from ourselves? Is it what you're trying to say?
No. So as far as like the opposite of empathy being distance,
Yes.
that the dark side of empathy being that yeah, I think I kind of answered a different question, but let me think about. Maybe the dark side of empathy is connecting so much to one thing that, yeah, we do disconnect or distance ourselves from other things.
Yes, so, and actually in a way,
Yeah.
we could distance ourselves from ourselves as well.
Yeah, that could be part of it. Yeah.
When you were talking about this, and I love that the opposite of empathy is, it's a good way to grasp the concept. And then I was thinking, but when we are meditating, we kind of have to almost look at our thoughts. The advice is to look at our thoughts at a distance, right? And when you were saying it, I was like, well, what does this definition do to also self-empathy, right? So because we're in this dance.
Yeah, because and one of the most powerful exercises I ever did was like a triangle conversation. So it was starting the conversation as myself in the present moment, and then literally taking a physical step into the role of the other. So for me, it was my dark side, and then speaking from that point of view, and then taking a physical step into the role of the observer and observing the interaction. So yeah, it's true. Like I still feel there's an element of empathy in the observer role because you're still seeing things from both sides, but it's more analytical, I think. So observing the interaction, reporting on the facts.
Yeah.
Rather than that heart-centered connection of empathy.
Yeah. Do you know what? And what comes to me is you got to have a distance from your own triggers to have empathy for another. So actually, as usual, it's part of the same. So actually you know what I mean? So it's like just distancing from being triggered ourselves to be able to see beyond and apply curiosity to another person.
Yeah, I think so. What's coming up for me is I think there needs to first be that connection, but then maybe distancing from the emotional part of that connection. Because it is more difficult, I think, to discuss certain issues if there's that heart connection, that emotional connection, because that is so much easier to trigger than the logical part of who we are, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe it's still making that connection first, but then having the ability to just take even just a half step back from the emotions and step a little bit more into the logical.
Yes, that's true. So it's just basically stepping out of the and realizing when the lizard brain is triggered, realizing when the limbic system gets into the action, and through breathing or whatever we do, connect to this prefrontal cortex, and then feel the sympathetic connection with another person.
Yeah. Yeah. And the example I give of that is like, that's like thinking about that process. That's exactly how I solve problems. Is I'll listen to all of the emotional reactions and find that connection and understand them. But then, okay, so what do we actually want to achieve? And then start going into the strategic part of it and the steps and what do we actually need to do next to get this done?
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the best description, I suppose, of the process I go through with problem solving, is that connection first, understanding, but then, okay, let's go into logical, strategic mode. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Still keeping those emotional considerations in place, but focusing on what the priority is. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, when you speak about it, you even, you know, it's almost a slightly different version of Tamara. Is coming much more like analytical, and you know, and I guess it's like it's a mosaic of the versions which we want to show, or which we want to show up.
Yeah, or need to show up in certain situations. Like it's easy to kind of get in this headspace that, you know, we need to be all of ourselves all the time. And the reality is we do kind of need to be chameleons, because every situation is going to call for a different version of ourselves, and every situation, a different version of ourselves is going to be more or less appropriate. So I think it's important to be in touch with who you are, so that you can draw on those elements when you need them. But there's no pressure to be everything all the time.
That's true. That's true. And in the same way, even with empathy, you know, because what I have been thinking about is this difference between empathy and sympathy as well, you know. Because of course, when we truly feel the other person's emotions, like say, for example, if they're in fear, then obviously fear is anyway contagious. If we let this feel it so much, this fear, then actually we will put it back onto them. So, you know, it will be just acceleration, kind of amplification of fear, right?
Yeah.
So
and panic is a great example of that. Like when we allow ourselves to slip too much into that fear, into that emotional side, we panic. We're incapable of taking the next step, of saving ourselves or doing what we need to do, because we're so stuck in that fear and that panic and that paralyzation.
So actually we do need distance in that situation. So we could, you know, so it's like, it's almost space, having a space for cognitive understanding, and actually, cognitive and emotional understanding, but then taking a distance with not letting this contagion take over yourself, because then it will go into mutual panic and doesn't reach the outcome that both desire.
Yeah, exactly.
Tamara, I enjoyed so much this conversation about different aspects of empathy.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
So thank you for bringing it in today.
You're welcome. Pleasure.